Night shifts are lonely. Empty halls, flickering lights, the hum of machines no one pays attention to in the day. Most people hate them. But for Raymond, a hospital security guard, the quiet was part of the job. That was before he got assigned to Sublevel B. That was where the morgue was. Raymond had worked nights for 6 years. He thought he'd seen it all. Families grieving in waiting rooms, drunks stumbling in for stitches, the occasional patient slipping away when no one was watching. He told himself the morgue was no different. Just another wing. Just another hallway. But Sublevel B was different. It was always colder there, not just because of the refrigeration, but in the walls themselves. As if the concrete held a permanent chill. The lights hummed louder, buzzing in short, uneven bursts, and the shadows seemed to stretch too far down the corridors. His very first night there, Raymond noticed something off. At 2:13 a.m., when the building was at its quietest, he heard a sound. Not the clatter of a gurney, not the creak of pipes. Whistling, a soft, low tune echoing from the morgue doors. But when he checked, the room was dark and locked, bodies zipped and tagged. The second night, it got worse. He was making his rounds when the intercom crackled to life. Static at first, then a voice. Faint, drawn out. Sublevel B, room 4. Raymond froze. Room 4 was one of the freezer vaults. He checked the log. No staff were scheduled. Still he went. The door was locked, heavy with frost. He swiped his card, pushed it open. The vault was empty, except for a single gurney at the far end. A body lay under the sheet, but the toe tag was blank. When he reached to lift the sheet, the intercom crackled again, right behind him this time. Close the door. Raymond spun, heart hammering. The hall outside was empty. He slammed the vault shut, swearing never to go back alone. By the third week, Sublevel B was driving him insane. Sometimes when he passed the morgue viewing window, he saw movement under the sheets. A twitch, a hand pressing upward. Once during his patrol, he saw footprints, bare feet outlined in condensation, leading away from the freezer room and stopping at the elevator. But the cameras showed nothing. When he rewound the footage, the footprints appeared, slowly one after another, as if someone invisible was walking. Raymond reported it. The supervisor laughed it off. You're just spooking yourself. It's the morgue, Ray. Everyone hears things. But Raymond wasn't laughing, especially not after the night the lights went out. It was near 3 a.m. He was walking the corridor when the fluorescence flickered, then died, plunging Sublevel B into blackness. His flashlight shook as he clicked it on, beam trembling down the hall. The whistling started again, closer this time. Slow, patient. He followed it against every instinct until it drew him to the morgue doors. He lifted his light and froze. Every freezer drawer was open. Dozens of them, sheets draped down like empty cocoons. And on the floor, faint impressions, as though knees and hands had pressed into the tiles, as though the dead had climbed out. Raymond staggered back, dropped his radio, and ran. But the elevator wouldn't come. The button clicked red, unresponsive. Behind him, something moved. Soft, dragging steps. He turned. In the beam of his flashlight, a figure stood at the far end of the hall. A woman, pale, her hospital gown clinging to her frame, eyes black pits. Her head twitched as though it had been broken once and never set right. She took a step forward, lips parting. And in the same low voice he'd heard on the intercom, she whispered, "Close the door." The light snapped back. The freezer drawers were sealed. The hall was empty. Raymond quit the job the next morning. But even now, when he walks past automatic doors or hears an intercom crackle, his stomach twists. Because sometimes, faint through the static, he swears he hears that same tune, whistling, waiting. Hospitals never really sleep. Even at 3 a.m., machines hum, monitors beep, and somewhere a nurse's shoes squeak faintly down a hallway. But there's a difference between a hospital alive with quiet activity and one where silence hangs like a heavy curtain, pressing down on your ears until you're certain you can hear your own heart. Mark, the new night janitor, learned that difference in Ward 6A. Ward 6A was closed. Patients had been moved out months ago after budget cuts. Some said it was temporary. Others said the wing had been unlucky. Too many deaths, too many codes called at odd hours. Officially, it was storage now. Unofficially, staff whispered about it the way children whisper about houses at the end of the street. Something's wrong there, but no one says it too loud. Security required nightly sweeps. Janitors were told to clean once a week. Mark drew the short straw. He told himself it would be easy, just a dead ward. 14 rooms, empty beds, flickering lights. But his very first walk down its long corridor, he felt something watching. It started with the glass. He was pushing his broom past the windows when he saw her reflection. A nurse, tall, thin, in the old-style white uniform with a pointed cap. She was walking behind him. Mark spun around. The hall was empty. He laughed nervously and told himself it was just his imagination. He kept sweeping. But when he glanced at the glass again, she was closer. The next night, he brought a flashlight, convinced the overhead lights were playing tricks. Ward 6A smelled different from the rest of the hospital. The air was damp, stale, tinged with something metallic, like dried blood mixed with mold. He reached room 12 and froze. Someone was humming. A woman's voice, low and steady, drifting from the dark room. He forced himself to look inside. Empty, but the humming didn't stop. It was coming from the intercom speaker mounted above the bed. The intercom system had been shut off months ago. By week 3, he was losing sleep. He jumped at shadows, startled at his own reflection. He tried to joke about it. When he mentioned it to a security guard, the man's smile faltered. "Don't let her follow you out," the guard muttered. Mark laughed nervously. "Who?" The guard's eyes hardened. "The nurse. Everyone sees her eventually." On his 5th week, things escalated. The cameras caught something. Mark had reported strange noises the night before, so security pulled the footage. At 2:47 a.m., the camera showed Mark pushing his cart through 6A. The hall was empty, but 5 seconds later, in a flicker of static, a figure appeared behind him. A nurse in white, her head tilted sharply as though her neck had broken once and never healed right. Her mouth hung slightly open, lips blue, and she followed him for 2 full minutes, step for step, before vanishing in another burst of static. Mark almost quit then, but he needed the paycheck, so he kept going back. That night, the humming was waiting for him. This time, it wasn't one voice. It was several, layered, all singing different, broken tunes, bleeding into each other like a choir of the damned. Mark clapped his hands over his ears. The sound came from every intercom speaker, though the system remained unplugged. The lights buzzed overhead, flickered, and then one by one they shut off, until only the far end of the hallway glowed, and in that glow stood the nurse. Her pale face twisted into a grin that wasn't human. Her hands clutched a clipboard so tightly the wood cracked. Mark backed away, heart hammering. The nurse began to walk, not fast, not slow, but with a dragging shuffle, each step scraping the tiles like bones grinding together. The lights went out behind her with every step she took, until the corridor was plunging into darkness at her heels. Mark turned and ran. He bolted for the stairwell, but the elevator at the end of the hall dinged open. He skidded to a stop. Inside the elevator stood the nurse. The same pale face. The same crooked smile. Her head tilted, twitching. She raised her clipboard, and the lights flickered violently. On the cracked leather front, Mark saw his last name burned into it. He screamed and sprinted for the stairwell. His keys slipped from his hands, clattering against the tiles. As he bent to grab them, he felt a breath brush his ear. A whisper, low and final. "Your shift isn't over." Mark burst through the stairwell door, stumbling down the steps 2 at a time. By the time he crashed into the lobby, the lights were normal again, the humming gone. Other staff looked up as he collapsed against the desk, pale and trembling. He told them only one thing: there's someone still working in 6A. The next day he quit. But curiosity gnawed at him. 2 weeks later, he came back as a visitor. He asked the receptionist about Ward 6A. She frowned. That wing's been closed for years, ever since the nurse died there. Mark's throat tightened. What happened to her? The woman shrugged. Collapsed mid-shift. Heart failure. They said she was overworked. She didn't stop until her body gave out. Mark asked quietly, "Do you know her name?" The receptionist glanced down at the old file. Her lips moved silently before she spoke, and when Mark heard the answer, his blood ran cold. Because it was the same name he'd seen etched into the cracked clipboard she carried, his own last name. Warehouses have their own kind of silence at night. In the day, they are alive. Forklifts beeping, radios buzzing, men calling orders, the constant clang of pallets hitting the floor. But when the last worker leaves and the bay doors roll shut, the noise dies. What remains is cavernous silence, where every step echoes too long and every shadow seems to wait for you to notice it. Alan, a night security guard, thought it was all in his head, until the warehouse cameras started showing him things that weren't there. The building was a medical supply hub, rows of shelves stacked with sterile boxes, surgical kits, instruments wrapped in plastic, orderly, predictable. Alan worked alone. The pay was steady, the job was simple. Check doors, watch monitors, log reports. And with 62 cameras covering the entire warehouse, he felt secure. The cameras became his company, his eyes, his reassurance that the aisles were empty, even when the silence made him doubt it. But by his 4th week, he stopped trusting them. It started with camera 14. A simple glitch. 1 second of static, then the aisle popped back into view. Alan logged it, shrugged it off. The next night, camera 14 glitched again. Only this time, for 2 frames, he saw movement. A shadow. It wasn't the kind of blur caused by poor feed. It was shaped, long, human-like, but distorted, as if someone had walked directly in front of the lens. He rewound, normal aisle, empty. But when he paused on the glitch, the shadow stood perfectly still, facing the camera. Alan told himself it was nothing. Old wiring, dust, a trick. But over the next week, more cameras began to glitch. Camera 21 caught a pallet jack rolling 3 feet across the floor. Camera 6 showed boxes stacked neatly at midnight, then an hour later, toppled into a heap without anyone entering the aisle. But the strangest was camera 31. At exactly 2:47 a.m. every night, it showed Alan himself walking down the aisle, even when he wasn't there. The first time, Alan stared at the monitor for a full minute, convinced he was overtired. But there he was. His uniform, his gait, the way his flashlight swayed in his hand. Only, the Alan on the monitor wasn't moving naturally. He walked slowly, too slowly, then stopped, and tilted his head up at the lens. Alan sat frozen, mouth dry, because the Alan on the screen smiled and raised a hand in a wave. Alan glanced up at the real camera mounted above the aisle. He was sitting in the control room, not walking, not waving. When he looked back, the monitor cut to static. When the feed returned, the aisle was empty. The next morning, he filed a report. Management dismissed it. Old system. Just clean the lens, don't overthink it. But Alan wasn't overthinking. He was scared. By his second month, Alan dreaded the 2:47 a.m. window. He tried tricks to prove it was all mechanical failure, walking into the aisle with his flashlight, tapping the camera pole, even filming on his phone to compare the feed. But the Alan on the monitor always behaved differently. Sometimes he just stood still, smiling. Sometimes he paced in tight circles. Once, the copy pressed his face close to the lens until the screen warped with static. And every time, the feed ended with him tilting his head at the camera, the same way the shadow had in camera 14. Alan stopped sleeping well. He had dreams of walking the aisles, alone, with cameras above him blinking red like eyes. In the dreams, he never stopped walking. He just circled endlessly until another version of himself stepped out from between the shelves. Then came the night the alarms tripped. Motion sensors in aisle 7 went off at 3:12 a.m. Alan checked the monitors. Nothing. He grabbed his flashlight, heart pounding, and went to check. The aisle stretched long and silent, boxes stacked in perfect rows. His footsteps echoed too loudly in the still air. Halfway down, he stopped. A single box had been pulled into the middle of the aisle. Its lid was open. Inside wasn't medical equipment. It was a monitor, playing live footage of him, standing in aisle 7, right where he stood. Alan dropped the light, his own pale face staring back at him from the screen. Then the image changed. The Alan on the monitor smiled, and behind him on the feed, a tall shadow unfolded between the shelves. Alan spun around, light shaking wildly. Nothing. The aisle was empty. But when he turned back, the shadow on the monitor was closer, its arms stretching toward the back of his head. The screen flickered. The shadow's hand was now inches away. Alan staggered back, and the warehouse lights snapped off. The control room monitors all lit up at once. Every single feed showed Alan, in different aisles from different angles, but none of them matched what he was doing. Each Alan stood still. Each stared up at the cameras, and each one smiled. Alan quit the next day. He didn't even collect his last paycheck. But sometimes when he looks at his phone late at night, the screen flickers, and for half a second, he doesn't see his reflection. He sees himself, standing behind him, smiling. Factories don't really sleep, even when the belts stop, when the machines go cold, when the last worker leaves. The air hums with memory. You can smell the oil, hear the echo of clanging metal, feel the vibration of long shifts that ended years ago. Evan, a night security guard, always said the silence was worse than the noise. And he was right, because in the abandoned wing of the factory, the silence had a heartbeat. It kept time with the clock. The plant had been downsizing for years. Once it had employed hundreds. Now, only one wing still ran. The rest sat dark, left for future redevelopment that never came. That was where Evan patrolled, alone. He hated it. The abandoned section smelled of mildew and grease. Rusted machines hunched like skeletons. Rats skittered in the walls, and the concrete dripped with condensation. The fluorescent lights buzzed, flickering at random as if the building itself was trying to blink awake. And on his patrol route, every hour he passed the old break room. That was where the clock stood. A heavy iron gray punch clock bolted to the wall built decades ago. A tray still held neat stacks of punch cards, their edges curled yellow. Nobody had used it since the 90s, but it had never been removed. The first week, Evan barely noticed it, just another relic, another reminder of better times. The second week, he started to feel uneasy. Every time he passed, he felt eyes on him. The clock face seemed to watch, its needle trembling faintly as if ticking, though the hands never moved. And on his third week, it began. At 2 a.m. exactly, as he passed the break room, he heard it. Click. The unmistakable sound of the punch clock stamping a card. Evan froze. He knew he was the only one there. When he approached, a fresh card lay in the tray. The namespace was blank, but in red ink the time was stamped 2 a.m. The next night he watched. At 1:59 he stared at the clock. At 2 eyes it clicked. A card slid into the tray. This one bore a faint smudge, a dark streak like grease. By the end of the week he had a small pile of them, each card stamped 2 a.m. Each one blemished, a smear, a thumbprint, a faint red streak that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Evan kept them in his locker, not sure why, maybe to prove he wasn't losing his mind. But when he tried to show a co-worker on the morning shift, the stains were gone. The cards were clean. Too clean, like they'd been freshly printed. He told himself it was a glitch, old wiring, stuck gears, until the cameras caught it. Camera 12 pointed straight at the hallway by the break room. For weeks it showed nothing but stillness. But on the night the clock stamped at 2 a.m., the feed warped. Static hissed, and for 3 seconds a figure appeared. A man. Tall, broad shoulders, steel-toed boots, a factory uniform stained with grease. But his face blurred, features melted by static. And he wasn't punching in, he was staring into the lens. Evan reported it. The supervisor laughed. Factories full of EMF, old wiring. Cameras pick up junk all the time. But when Evan checked the log, the motion sensors had tripped. At 2 a.m. Exactly. After that, the patrol grew unbearable. He began hearing things. Footsteps behind him. Heavy. Deliberate. Marching in rhythm like men walking the line. Once, the break room light flickered on as he passed. Through the glass, he saw tables crowded with mugs, steam curling from them as though workers had just left. When he blinked, the room was dark again. One night, he brought his phone. He wanted proof. At 1:55 a.m., he filmed himself standing in front of the clock. The corridor was silent. His flashlight beam wavered over peeling paint. At exactly 2 a.m., the clock clicked. A card slid out. This time there was writing. His name. Below it, scrawled in shaky red letters. Still on shift. Evan dropped the phone. His breath came in ragged gasps. When he picked it up, the footage showed something he hadn't seen in person. A man standing just behind him. Blurry, faceless, holding a card. Evan almost quit, but he needed the paycheck. So he kept coming back. And the clock kept stamping. By his 5th week, things escalated. The cards no longer appeared blank. They bore names. Old names. Names of men who had died on the job decades ago. He checked the archives to be sure. There they were. Accidents in the 70s and 80s. One crushed in a press. One burned in an electrical fire. One fell into the gears of a conveyor. Every name had a date. Every card bore the stamp 2 a.m. Then came the night of the storm. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder rolled. The power flickered. Evan forced himself down the hall at 1:59. The lights sputtered. At 2:00, the clock didn't just click. It roared. Stamping over and over, spitting out cards until they littered the floor. Dozens, hundreds, each one stamped with his name. The air grew heavy. Footsteps pounded from the dark, not one pair, dozens. When Evan turned, the corridor was filling with men. Workers in tattered uniforms, their faces burned, broken, skin gray and sagging. Each carried a card. Each stared at him with hollow sockets glowing faint red. And at the far end stood the faceless foreman, clipboard in hand. He raised it slowly, and in a voice like metal grinding on metal, he rasped, "Back to work." The lights burst, plunging the corridor into strobes. Every flash showed them closer. The men. The hands reaching. The cards pressed toward him. Until the final flash showed the clock face glowing red. And then darkness. When the day crew arrived, the factory was silent. The patrol log showed Evan checked in at 1:30 a.m., but he never clocked out. In the tray stacked neatly were hundreds of punch cards, all with his name. All stamped 2 a.m. Most offices are dead at night. Desks sit empty, chairs tucked in, computers dark, the carpet silent under your shoes. The only sound is the hum of the HVAC and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. But not every office sleeps. Some keep working, even when everyone's gone. Tom, an overnight IT worker, found that out the hard way. Because floor 9 of his building wasn't empty. Tom liked the night shift. It gave him space, peace. No bosses breathing down his neck, no co-workers asking for help with their printers, no phones ringing, just servers humming and coffee keeping him awake. Floor 9 was quiet too. Half the cubicles were empty, vacated after a company merger. Whole rows sat stripped bare, with unplugged monitors and dusty keyboards. The vending machines in the corner were dark, humming faintly as though they hadn't been powered down correctly. He set up shop in a cubicle near the middle, laptop open, headphones hanging around his neck. The first week was fine, but on the second week at 2:30 a.m. something changed. He noticed the lights first. At the far end of the office, cubicle lights flicked on, one by one. Click, 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 as though someone was walking past, triggering them in sequence. But there were no motion sensors on that floor. Tom grabbed his flashlight, went to check. The cubicles were empty, desks bare, chairs tucked. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. That was when he heard it. Printer. The machine sputtered, grinding to life, spitting out a single sheet of paper. He picked it up. Blank. He laughed nervously, tossed it away, told himself it was just a stray job caught in memory. The next night, the same printer whirred again. This time, the page wasn't blank. One line ran across the center, faint and crooked. "Who's still working?" Tom's hands went cold. He yanked the plug from the wall. But when he walked past an hour later, another sheet lay in the tray. "We are." He stopped laughing after that. By week 3, the floor had changed. Monitors began turning on by themselves. Screens glowed faint blue across empty cubicles. At first, they showed nothing but static. But when Tom leaned closer, the static sharpened into letters. Names. Dozens of them. He ran the list through the company database. Everyone matched employees from 20 years earlier. Floor 9 had been their floor, and they had all died in a fire. Tom went to his manager. "I need to move floors. The equipment up there's acting strange." The manager barely looked up. "We need you there. Don't make trouble. You're already set up." So Tom stayed. And the floor kept him company. The phone started next. Desk phones that had been disconnected years ago. At 3:13 a.m., one rang, its green light blinking faintly. Against his better judgment, Tom answered. Static hissed. Then a voice, low, breathless. "Don't stay late." He slammed it down. But the ringing continued. One by one across the office, every phone lit up, ringing in chorus. The sound rose to a deafening pitch, then silence. All the handsets lay off the hook. By his 5th week, Tom was unraveling. He kept his back to the wall. He drank coffee until dawn. He played music on his headphones but still heard whispers seeping through, like faint conversations happening 3 cubicles away. He started seeing things out of the corner of his eye. A tie dangling around a corner. A shadow moving in an empty hallway. Once he swore he saw the reflection of a man in a monitor, leaning over his shoulder, though the screen was turned off. The storm sealed his fate. Rain hammered the windows, wind screamed through the vents. At 2:30 a.m., the cubicle lights at the far end flickered on again. Tom froze. Figures sat in the chairs. Men and women in business attire, suits smudged with soot, hair matted, eyes gray. Their hands jerked across keyboards, typing furiously, papers shuffling, phones lifting to ears. A full office, alive and busy. He blinked. The cubicles were empty, but the sound of typing continued. Keys clicking, phones ringing, printers spitting. At 3:13 a.m., the phones rang again. Every single one. Tom covered his ears, heart pounding, but over the noise came footsteps. Slow, deliberate. He looked up. At the far end of the office, a man stood. His suit was blackened, half his face melted, jaw hanging loose. In his hand, he held a scorched folder, and in a voice torn by smoke, he rasped, "Time to file your report." Every monitor turned on at once, row after row of glowing screens, and on each screen, Tom saw himself. One showed him sitting at his desk. Another showed him asleep. Another showed him screaming, hands clawing at his hair. But in every frame, a tall, faceless shadow loomed behind him, leaning closer. Closer, closer. The lights burst. Darkness swallowed the floor. In that blackness, hundreds of keyboards clattered, printers screeched, phones shrieked. The office had come back to life, and it wanted him working. The next morning, Tom was gone. His laptop sat cracked on his desk, and on the printer tray lay one final page. "We are still working." If you made it this far, thank you for spending your night with us. If these stories gave you chills, there's plenty more waiting. Don't forget to subscribe to Night Fear Stories for new terrifying tales every single night. Sleep well, if you can.